All right, let's bring in Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas. Thanks so much, sir, for taking time for us today. You heard John's report there. He played a clip of the president yesterday at NATO saying the U.S. is willing to cooperate with Russia if we can find some areas of common agreement. What are they? Are there any left at this point?
No, Jillian, I'm afraid they're not. And, I'm less concerned how Joe Biden stumbles and bumbles his way through describing Vladimir Putin than I am concerned about how Joe Biden behaves towards Vladimir Putin. And for the last 4 months, he has been pathetically weak. In the earliest days of his administration, President Biden extended the one arms control treaty we have left with Russia, a treaty that is badly one-sided in Russia's favor. He also is allowing Germany to finish the pipeline that's going to bring Russian gas into Germany, hooking Western Europe ever more deeply on Russian gas while harming our allies in Central and Eastern Europe. And as the report said, we have had numerous attacks, whether it's on the Colonial Pipeline or JBS USA and their meat production plants. And right now, Joe Biden has even said that he's not imposing all the sanctions he could. He's certainly not taking the aggressive offensive actions we could to impose a cost on Vladimir Putin for these actions. Joe Biden can say whatever he wants at this summit tomorrow, but until he acts with strength and with vigor, then Vladimir Putin is going to know he still has the upper hand.
Sir, if you were the president today, right, how do you go into this meeting in terms of ranking the security threats that Russia now poses? They're preparing to launch some kind of a ground incursion, perhaps, in Ukraine. There's war in cyberspace. There's the nuclear program you just mentioned. There is their treatment of dissidents and human rights abuses, including of Alexei Navalny. How do you give us some sense of how you would prioritize these different threats?
Well, first, Jillian, I would not be going into this summit tomorrow. I think it was ill-advised for the president to make one of his first major bilateral summits overseas with Vladimir Putin, especially after this string of weak actions towards Russia. The president should have spent more time this weekend focused on China and the threat that China poses and bring our European allies along with us to see that threat, as opposed to talking so much about things like climate change. Russia remains a threat, but China is the threat that the United States and really the free world faces in the decades ahead.
You grabbed my attention last night with my colleague Laura Ingraham when you said there is this very real potential threat that nobody seems to be talking about, which is what if the Russian and Chinese governments tag team on some of these issues? What if they decide it's in their strategic interest to take on the U.S. together, let's say, in cyberspace? Can you tease that line of thinking out for us a little bit?
Sure, Jillian. It's always been a centerpiece of U.S. foreign policy, going back to the earliest days, to ensure that the old world couldn't unite its population, its resources, its landmass against the new world, which is to say primarily the United States. This is a concern we had in the earliest days of the Cold War, that communist Russia and communist China would unite together against the United States and against Western Europe. One of the real diplomatic masterstrokes of the Cold War was when Henry Kissinger and Richard Nixon went to China and helped turn China against the Soviet Union. But that was then. This is now. China is the main threat now, and we need to ensure that we are taking steps to prevent that kind of cooperation, to keep pressure both on China in the Western Pacific and East Asia, but pressure on Russia as well, so they don't have the ability to cooperate, that they can't combine their vast terrain, their peoples, their resources in a way that would undermine American jobs, American prosperity, and ultimately America's freedom.
Yeah. A whole new world now in the 21st century for these kinds of foreign policy threats. I want to ask you lastly, before I let you go, about some news that came out over the weekend. It appears that there is now this growing momentum towards Ukraine joining NATO. Is that in the U.S. strategic interest?
Well, I think at the moment we need to be careful about expanding NATO into countries that have Russian troops on their soil. NATO, remember, has a mutual support commitment, Article 5 of the NATO Charter, that if one country is attacked or its territory is invaded, it can call on the support of all countries. Well, countries like Ukraine and Georgia currently have Russian soldiers on their soil. We should work with the Ukrainians, we should work with the Georgians to try to restore territorial sovereignty, to protect them from Russian predations. But at the moment, I think NATO membership is getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Interesting. All right. Well, Senator, thanks so much for taking time for us today. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jillian.
You bet.